The producers at The View were skeptical the moment Joy Behar suggested inviting Ibrahim Traoré onto the show. "He's too serious," one muttered. "He doesn't play politics like we do," said another, but Joy was adamant she wanted a sparring match, a spectacle. "Let's expose this guy," she said, half smirking, half daring. "If he's really the hero the internet claims he is, let him prove it." To their surprise, Traoré accepted the invitation. On the morning of the taping, backstage energy was tense. Joy rehearsed her talking points while sipping coffee, preparing sharp remarks about human rights, democracy, and modern values. She expected him to be stiff, overly formal, maybe even awkward with the language. In her mind, he was just another foreign leader who wouldn't understand the rhythm of American media. But everything changed the moment he walked onto the set. Traoré didn't wear a suit, just a dark jacket with a single gold pin in the shape of Africa. Calmly, he nodded to the hosts and sat down with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need applause to feel significant. His presence unsettled Joy. No bravado, no attempt to charm, just steady composure. After introductions, she went straight for the confrontation. "Mr. Traoré, let's get real. You're celebrated as a great African reformer, but your critics say you suppress the press, control the courts, and reject democracy. Aren't you just another strongman hiding behind big speeches?" A few polite gasps rippled through the audience. As the other co-hosts shifted in their seats, Joy smiled, anticipating either an awkward denial or a meltdown. But Traoré simply looked at her and replied, his voice slow and deliberate. "Are you asking as a journalist, Ms. Behar, or as someone who's uncomfortable when the oppressed stop asking for permission?" Joy blinked, uncertain whether she'd just been insulted or enlightened. As the room fell completely silent, the tone had shifted. Joy Behar straightened in her seat, the corners of her mouth tightening. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she assumed she could control. Glancing briefly at the camera, she regrouped and fired back. "So, it's oppression now to question power," she smirked. "You claim to fight for freedom, yet you silence opposition and reject foreign aid. That doesn't sound very free to me." She chuckled, expecting laughter from the audience, but silence followed. Traoré didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady. "You speak of freedom," he said calmly, "as if it's a gift granted by the West. But in my country, we remember the kind of freedom that arrived on ships with chains, with guns, with flags flying over stolen soil." Joy's smile faltered. Traoré continued, his voice even and clear. "You speak from a place where freedom is often exchanged for comfort, where questioning the government is a trend, not a threat, where dissent earns headlines, not graves." The tension in the studio thickened. Even the co-hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Joy tried to interrupt, but Traoré raised a hand, not rudely, but like a professor pausing a student. "You want to shame me for resisting influence," he said. "But my people have lived under a shame crafted by those who now preach morality. You dress it in democracy, brand it with aid, but we know its cost." He paused, letting the silence settle. Joy folded her arms. "You're deflecting," she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. Traoré turned slightly toward the audience. "If truth sounds like deflection," he said, "perhaps the lie has lasted too long." The camera zoomed in, his face unreadable, not smug, not angry, just resolute. For the first time in years, Joy Behar had no comeback, still trying to regain control. She flipped to another card and said, "All right, Mr. Traoré, you talk about colonialism like it's still happening, but you've been in power for over 2 years. At some point, you can't keep blaming history for your problems." Traoré tilted his head slightly, unfazed and unhurried. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, yet unmistakably commanding. "You think history ended just because it no longer knocks on your doorstep," he said. "But in my country, the mines are still run by foreign companies. The treaties are still written in foreign languages. The schools still teach foreign heroes. Colonialism didn't disappear, it just changed its costume." The room went cold. The co-host sat frozen, and Joy blinked rapidly, unsure if she had just lost the audience. Traoré continued, "You see, I am not my country's problem, I am its response." He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "When we shut down foreign military bases, We weren't isolating, we were remembering. When we refused your aid, we weren't being defiant, we were breaking the leash. A wave of applause broke out across the audience, not all, but enough to startle the producers. Joy let out an awkward laugh. You make it sound like you're accusing America of imperialism, she said, attempting to lighten the tension. Isn't that a bit dramatic? Traoré's voice dropped a notch. If naming the hand that held the whip is dramatic, he said, then perhaps drama is overdue. The silence wasn't awkward, it was weighty. Joy set her cards down, no longer smiling. In that moment, she realized this wasn't the man she thought she could corner. He wasn't an African leader desperate for Western validation. He was someone who had arrived with nothing to prove and everything to teach. In the control room, quiet panic set in. Producers whispered urgently through headsets. Camera angles shifted. Someone typed furiously on the teleprompter. Joy Behar was supposed to be steering the segment, cracking jokes, shaping opinions, but now she looked cornered in her own studio. Traoré sat still, not triumphant, not arrogant, just unshakably composed. You speak with such certainty, Joy said, scrambling for another line of attack. But what makes you think your model of leadership works? Your critics call you authoritarian. You've silenced journalists. You've detained opposition. Traoré slowly turned to face her, his expression unreadable. No, he replied simply. I silenced the voices paid to scream on someone else's behalf. The audience stirred once more. Some leaned forward, hanging on every word, while others glanced toward the exits, unsure how a talk show had turned into a reckoning. You accuse me of being strong, Traoré continued, as if strength is corruption, as if discipline is violence. But I've watched your democracy let men bomb nations and walk free. I've seen corporations write your laws. You lecture the world with clean hands. But history remembers the fingerprints. Joy opened her mouth, but Traoré wasn't finished. We never chose to be your enemy, he said. We simply chose not to be your echo. The words cracked through the room like thunder. A beat passed, then another. One host, usually outspoken, remained silent. Another nodded slightly, almost involuntarily. Joy glanced toward the camera, searching for an escape. So what do you want then, Mr. Traoré? She asked sharply. If not partnership, then what? He didn't blink. Respect, he replied. The word hit like a drumbeat, simple, steady, undeniable. And for the first time in the segment, Joy looked unsure, not of him, of herself. The camera panned across the audience. Something had shifted. The usual rhythm of daytime television, light laughter, applause on cue. Polite disagreement had given way to something unfamiliar, tension, focus, curiosity. Joy leaned back, posture slightly defensive. Her usual arsenal, wit, sarcasm, charm, wasn't working. And Traoré wasn't playing her game. He was rewriting the rules. You talk a lot about respect, she said cautiously. But don't you think respect is earned? Don't nations, like people, need to prove themselves before demanding a seat at the table? Traoré looked at her, then offered a soft smile, not mocking, but almost sorrowful. You say earned, as if we haven't already paid the price, he said. We bled in your wars. We labored in your factories. Our minerals built your satellites. Our silence bought your comfort. How much more do you want before we're allowed to speak? A low murmur swept through the crowd, then silence. Joy glanced at her co-hosts for support. None came. One stared down at the table. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The cameras captured it all. You sit in this chair, Traoré continued, and measure the world with a scale that only balances when you're on top. But the world is tilting, Ms. Behar, and you no longer have your hand on the lever. In the control room, a producer frantically motioned to cut to commercial, but it was too late. Whether it was damage or truth, it had already landed. Joy tried to recover. You're quite poetic for a politician, she said, forcing a smile. Are you sure you're in the right profession? Traoré answered without hesitation. I lead people. I don't entertain them. The words hit like a punch. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore, it was reverent. As the red light above the camera blinked off, signaling a break, even Joy understood. The real show had already begun. The studio dimmed, but the tension remained. Joy yanked off her mic, muttering under her breath, her polished TV smile now replaced with lines of irritation. Across from her, Traoré sat still, sipping water calmly, his eyes drifting without focus. A junior producer approached quietly. "Can I get you anything before we're back on air?" Traoré shook his head. "Just fairness, but I'm used to waiting." The remark made the young man pause, then nod respectfully before stepping away. In the audience, whispers spread. "Did you hear what he said about the minerals?" One asked. "He's not wrong, but he sounds angry." Another replied, "Maybe he should be." In the control booth, the director's voice crackled. "We need to soften the tone. Joy is losing the audience. Cue a gentle re-entry after the break." Joy heard it in her earpiece and stiffened. "I don't need coaching," she snapped. "I need control." But it was clear she no longer had it. Meanwhile, Traoré glanced toward the back of the room, where an American veteran stood silently, arms crossed. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but the nod between them held quiet understanding, because even when the cameras stopped rolling, the truth hadn't. The countdown began. 5. Joy straightened in her seat. 4. Traoré folded his hands in his lap. 3. A hush fell across the studio. 2. The air turned electric. 1. The red light blinked back on. And in that instant, Joy Behar had a choice: attack again and risk losing control completely, or pivot before every viewer watching slipped through her grasp. But before she could speak, Traoré leaned in slightly and said, "You brought me here for drama. I came here for dignity." Once again, he had made the first move. The studio lights blazed brighter as the cameras resumed, but something had shifted. Joy forced a tight smile, but the spark of control that once animated her had dulled. Her co-hosts, usually lively and reactive, now sat motionless, unsure whether to back her or step aside. Choosing her next words carefully, Joy said, "You've made your points about colonialism, but let's talk about the future. Do you really believe your path cutting ties, rejecting aid, standing alone is sustainable?" Traoré tilted his head. "You see it as isolation. I see it as self-respect." Joy hesitated. It wasn't the answer she was hoping for. She pressed again. "But won't your people suffer without partnerships?" Traoré's gaze hardened, not with anger, but with unwavering resolve. "My people already suffer under the price of borrowed loyalty. Every loan comes with a lecture. Every grant comes with conditions. Every handshake hides a chain." He turned toward the audience. "Partnerships don't scare me, but I will not trade my nation's spine for applause." A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd, then applause. Spontaneous and sincere, Joy tried to pivot. "So what then? You want to turn your back on progress?" "No," he replied. "I want progress without permission." The words echoed through the room. Traoré leaned forward once more. "You call it independence when America does it. But when we do it, you call it rebellion. Why?" Joy had no answer. She blinked, her lips parted, but nothing came. The silence stretched beyond what live television usually allows, and in that silence, Traoré delivered his final blow, not with volume, not with accusation, but with presence alone. "Perhaps the real threat isn't what I represent," Traoré said. "It's that I no longer need your approval to exist." The audience erupted into louder applause this time. Instinctively, the camera operator zoomed in, capturing the subtle slump in Joy Behar's shoulders. For the first time during the broadcast, she didn't just look unsure of him, she looked unsure of herself. In the View's control room, chaos rippled through headsets. Producers whispered urgently, debating whether to cut to commercial. But the director held steady. Something electric was happening, and they knew it. Joy glanced at her cue cards, then set them aside. Her voice softened, just above a whisper. "Mr. Traoré, you speak of pride, power, and dignity. But in a world so interconnected, isn't it dangerous to teach your people defiance over diplomacy?" It was meant to be her recovery line, a clever trap disguised as concern. But Traoré didn't blink. "What's dangerous," he replied calmly, "is mistaking submission for diplomacy." The room tensed again. Leaning back, he spoke not just to Joy, but to every lens aimed at him. "Diplomacy is built on mutual respect, not lectures, not sanctions disguised as aid, and not the constant implication that we are only worthy if we mimic your image." Joy swallowed hard, visibly shaken. Her tone shifted again, now almost pleading. But surely you can see the benefits of aligning. With established democracies, I see the value of freedom, Traoré answered. And I've also seen the cost of aligning with those who speak democracy but practice obedience. The audience, once hesitant, now nodded and clapped softly. One of the co-hosts, silent until now, finally spoke. You're saying America talks liberty but operates with leverage. Traoré offered a faint smile. I'm saying real liberty doesn't come with fine print. The co-host leaned back, exhaling under her breath. Damn. Joy looked down at her notes, then back at the audience, then at Traoré. This wasn't the interview I expected, she said, half laughing. No, Traoré replied. It was the conversation that needed to happen. In that moment, the studio stopped feeling like a talk show and became something else. Part courtroom, part reckoning. The usual laughter had vanished, replaced by a heavy stillness filled with truth. Joy Behar steadied herself, but Traoré had already dismantled her narrative without ever raising his voice. You speak with conviction, she said, but don't you think you're painting the West with too broad a brush? Traoré responded calmly. Then why do our resources leave faster than our children return from wars you won't even admit they died in? The room froze. I'm not painting with a broad brush, he added. I'm holding up a mirror, and if the reflection is uncomfortable, maybe it's not the mirror that needs adjusting. Joy asked what he hoped to gain. I'm not here to gain, he said. I'm here to reclaim. Applause broke out, real, unprompted, earned. Audience members rose, hands clasped. Even the crew behind the scenes nodded. You came ready for a fight? Joy asked. No, Traoré replied. I came ready to be heard. As producers debated cutting to commercial, the executive producer waved them off. Let it roll. Joy leaned in, now curious. If you had one message for Americans watching right now, what would it be? Traoré didn't hesitate. That Africa is not your project. We are not waiting to be rescued. We are waking from a long sleep when you helped induce. And now that we're awake, we are not asking for your approval. We are demanding respect. Joy shifted in her seat, but Traoré continued. You taught us democracy, free press, independence, yet you withhold those things when they challenge your interests abroad. That's not freedom, that's manipulation. Silence followed. History is not just something you read, it's something you leave behind. And for too long, America's fingerprints have been etched across our scars. Joy didn't respond, not because she had no words, but because she recognized this wasn't politics, it was truth. The outro played, but it felt hollow. Online, the real show had just begun. Clips of Traoré's words went viral. Hashtags exploded. Supporters praised him, critics scrambled. But the numbers didn't lie, millions were watching. In the days that followed, the interview echoed across classrooms, boardrooms, and homes. Traoré hadn't just defended himself, he'd redefined the narrative. Joy Behar, once the show's anchor, had become a bystander to a moment that now belonged to him. In a world full of noise, one man chose history over hype. He didn't come to entertain. He came to reclaim dignity. While Joy tried to host a show, Traoré delivered a lesson, and in that moment, the student became the teacher, reminding the world that those who write history often forget those who lived it. Until now,